Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 220th episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Today we're going to talk about traveling alone well. A lot of you have commented when I was traveling throughout France that you wanted me to write a post about this, and I wanted to also take it a little bit deeper than what I've done in the past. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before I get to that, our petit plaisir is the simplest recipe that sounds quite complicated, but it's not. And it doesn't sound complicated in the name, but it just sounds fancy. So we automatically, I, way back when I first was introduced to this recipe, thought, oh, this must be really complicated. No. It's not 20 minutes done. You can do it. And I'll show you how and talk you through it. All right. So that's at the end of today's episode. But let's get to our topic for today. I want to share a quote by Alain de Botton, who wrote the book, The Art of Travel. And that's going to kick us off as we talk about this concept or this possibly, and in my experience, absolutely life-changing experience to make sure we do at least once, if not many, many more times in our lifetime. So here is the quote. It seemed an advantage to be traveling alone. Our responses to the world are crucially molded by the company we keep, for we temper our curiosity to fit in with the expectations of others. Being closely observed by a companion can also inhibit our observation of others. Then, too, we may become caught up in adjusting ourselves to the companion's questions and remarks, or feel the need to make ourselves seem more normal than is good for our curiosity. Oof. There's so much I want to unpack in that, and I will as we go through this. But a lot of what he's sharing are things we probably do unconsciously. And in the episode in episode 218, I talk about this idea of doubting our defaults. And while it's different when we're traveling with others, when we step away from the others, no matter how amazing they are, no matter how much we love them, it's when we step away that we recognize, oh, I was deferring, I was conforming, or I was dialing it down. I was trying to be normal, whatever that normal is or will be expected to be. But we can't often see that when we are in the presence or company of others. So I want to just share a short little list of perhaps worries that people have and worries I've heard from people tell me directly about traveling alone. Here we go. What if I lose my keys to my rental car, to my accommodations, to anything I have a key to that I need to get into? No one knows where I am. I am the only source of income. What if my wallet gets stolen? What if my passport gets stolen? As a woman, is it really smart to travel alone? But I will be by myself. Won't I become lonely? I don't want to eat alone the entire time, and I love to eat. These are just a few of the fears I have heard from, as I mentioned, those contemplating or dismissing solo travel. And at times, some of those fears have danced in my own mind when jet lag was severe and my mind was not being mastered very well. And while these are all natural fears to utter if we have never traveled alone, each can be assuaged and should be, after proper preparation, dismissed and not to be worried about. I have written extensively on this topic, and I've shared all of those posts on today's show notes at the bottom of this post. How to Travel Alone has a 2-part series where I very specifically delineate what to do, the actual logistics of preparing to travel. I have an international prep list for traveling. I have a list for how to travel luxuriously. I have a ton of these posts that I've already done, so I'm not going to say them all again. You can check them out. What I'd like to do today is share a few thoughts on this wonderful opportunity of traveling alone and insights that it provides us, the traveler, when we choose to do it. As I wrote this podcast and as I'm sharing it with you now, I, as you know, have just returned from a month-long excursion throughout France. And I only say that because I know you guys know that, but I say that because I want this to be a reminder. This is going to be a reminder to myself because I'm writing this after I have returned, but also to anyone who may have any of those fears or anything else that you worry about before you consider buying that ticket, going on that trip, and doing it on your own. Why? Because even I, prior to traveling, especially this big trip that I just went on, but even just when it's to another country or to any place I have never been before, if my schedule has been busy and harried leading up to the trip, I will consider, and sometimes my schedule will be just fine, but in most recent instances, as this last trip was, that was the case. And so my mind wasn't again entirely working at its best right up to the trip, and I let some of those worst case scenarios enter into it. But every time I return from a trip, I recognize that allowing myself to have those worries was wasted energy. All of my energy should be split between two things: preparation and excited anticipation. After all, part of the gift of travel is the time leading up to the trip, as studies have shown that it as well can increase our overall happiness. And I'll provide a link to those studies that were done in 2002, so you can check those out. Traveling alone in many ways is a misnomer, as we're never completely alone if we consider our fellow travelers we find along the way, Mother Nature, and conversations we have with loved ones when we check in from time to time if we choose to do so. The difference is we are never with the same person or persons the entire time, which can not only provide variety, but, as Alain de Botton shared in the quote I just began the episode with, it frees us from conforming in ways we often do unconsciously. Ironically, when I travel, my barriers tend to come down more so than when I am at home in ways that allow me to relax and be more fully present on my trip. Now, that doesn't mean I do not take precautions to protect myself for security purposes, but those are habits at this point when I travel, as I have traveled alone for more than a decade now. And they're merely functional as opposed to the emotional barriers that tend to become activated when I am in my everyday life as opposed to travel, where they come down. The truth is, it was travel that revealed this truth to me and caused me to dive deeper into what made me keep my barriers up so adamantly. This examination led me to shift a few things in my everyday life, move away from some friendships, step more intimately into others, etc. And yet, this is another example of how travel can improve our lives. If we consider the headaches that we worry might happen by choosing to travel alone, most, if not all, could just as easily happen when we are traveling with someone or multiple someones. While yes, you will have at least two heads to solve the fiasco, you will also have two heads to step into a fiasco that could cause the headache in the first place. I guess what I'm trying to say is that neither is better. They are just different. The common gift of traveling alone that is universally shared is that your confidence increases as you recognize you can do things you perhaps dismissed were possible previously. And this is true. As well, traveling alone, especially if I have not done so in a few years' time, reminds me that I need to trust myself more. Traveling alone clears away the cobwebs from my intuition if I have not trusted it as much as I should have, and shows me that I need to stop doubting myself so often and instead calmly keep listening to its direction and striving forward. And most importantly, traveling alone brings me back to myself, centers me, and shakes me awake if that is necessary. Speaking of being shaken awake, it has happened in the past that I was shaken, woken up, so to speak, but not entirely woken up to a clear state of, ooh, now I know what I need to do upon returning. However, it was a start, and as I chose to see it through, continued to keep shaking upon returning until the cobwebs and any learned behaviors that were not aligned with my authentic self finally fell away, I realized that this shedding doesn't have to happen so quickly, but it can still happen. And sometimes it will take years. But if we keep shaking, so to speak, our truth will emerge. The lesson that trip wanted to share with us, the insights it wanted to give to us. And it is then that we can look back at our travels with even more gratitude and the gratitude for having traveled alone. There are truths that I have only been able to experience or discover because I was traveling alone. Partly because at different times in my life, I didn't have the confidence to speak up enough to those I was traveling with and say clearly what I would prefer to do, or at least do so in a way that yielded an enjoyable experience. And sometimes I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just followed what the alpha person suggested in the group. But if I had been myself on those journeys, known myself, or at least known enough about myself, I would have just followed my curiosities without worrying about what anyone else thought or when I was supposed to return, and just let my curiosities guide me, which is exactly what I do now. I want to share a quote with you from Anna Quinlan. The life you have led doesn't need to be the only life you have. For me, traveling has led to the life I want to live. Without travel, I would not be and be doing what I am today. And as Anna Quinlan's quote shares, the life I was leading when the trip began, especially the first trip that I made to France, which was by myself, is not the life I live now. And I am confident it won't be the life I will be living in the future, because I'm probably, and I know it, I just don't know the answers yet. I'm still shaking things. I'm still trying to figure out what my trips, and especially this most recent trip, is trying to teach me. But as long as I keep shaking, I know those answers are going to come. As long as I keep diving in internally and exploring and asking questions, but also moving forward as I'm doing it, the answers are going to come. They're going to start to make sense. Traveling alone will show you quite quickly where your weaknesses are that can be strengthened. For example, if you immediately are not comfortable in your own company, that is something you can strengthen. And for your best self, you probably should. As well, if you do not know how to communicate well or engagingly, even if you do not speak the language, perhaps that is a hint that your awareness of the power of clear and effective communication needs to be tended to and improved. One of the lessons I learned on my first trip to France, which was in 2000, was to relax, let go of the worry and frazzle that perhaps we have learned when things aren't going perfectly to do. But again, that's learned. We don't need to freak out when things aren't going exactly as we think they should. The key is right there. We think it should. Well, who's to say? There's a lot of other players in this particular scenario. And instead, what we need to do is just look around ourselves, ask for help, take a deep breath, and know that there will be, in one instance that I experienced in my first trip, another train if you miss the one that you had hoped to be on or that you were planned to be on. More importantly, since you are traveling by yourself, you learn to step outside of yourself. And while, yes, you are taking care of yourself, you begin to see that when we only focus on ourselves, on our inner world, our potential is limited. When we instead choose to examine, how can I contribute? How can I improve so that I can be effective not only for myself, but the community I am currently in? We begin to get out of our own heads and become more present. And when we become more present, the experiences of travel become far more rich and memorable. If you are considering traveling alone for the first time, be sure to check the posts that I've included on the show notes, the bottom of the post. Check them out because they will prepare you specifically and clearly for a successful trip. And if you have traveled alone but haven't done so in a long time, or you find yourself kind of settled where you are but not in a great and comfortable way, and you're perhaps desiring a boost, why not consider traveling alone somewhere? Not only will it boost your confidence if you need it, but it will remind you, perhaps also what you need, how amazing your life already is. Or perhaps share with you how to make the tweaks and changes that you couldn't see had you stayed in one place. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I know that many of you want the specific list, and I have that list. I have it in a 2-part post series. It's on the show notes, the simplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 220. Check that out. Like I said, I also have the post about international travel, which was actually episode 183, how to travel luxuriously, travel's most wonderful gift, and how to just simply travel well. All of those are on the show notes in great detail. And I actually cover a lot of specific posts on traveling to France and in Paris, how to master the metro, in my first book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. I have an entire chapter dedicated to international travel, specifically traveling to France and throughout Paris. So if you want to check that out, that is in my book, my first book. All right, I will be right back. I want to introduce you to today's sponsor, as well as share with you this week's petit plaisir. Recently, I had the opportunity to try HelloFresh, which is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. As someone who loves cooking, as you guys know, there are more than a few times due to my busy schedule that I wish I had everything pre-organized, planned, and measured and ready to go, along with the peace of mind that the food would be fresh, responsibly obtained, and of course, delicious and healthy. As I have shared in the past on my Instagram feed, I have made some delicious meals from HelloFresh, enjoyed the recipes that they shared with me, and have derived some inspiration from them. They're delicious. The relish on the hamburger recipe that they sent us on brioche buns, oh my goodness. So let me share with you a little bit more about HelloFresh. There are 3 plans to choose from: classic, veggie, or family. I chose the classic as you can tailor it for 2 to 4 people, and you can also get to choose how many meals you want that week. They will then send enough ingredients for the number of people you have selected to enjoy each meal. And HelloFresh has thought of everything, as each box is made up of fresh, responsibly obtained ingredients from carefully selected farms and high-rated, trusted sources. Whether you are a beginner or a pro in their home kitchen, you will feel confident when cooking with HelloFresh, as they provide simple recipes outlined on pictured step-by-step instruction cards. All the ingredients come pre-measured in handy labeled meal kits, so you know which ingredients go with which recipe, and I can attest each recipe will only take you 30 minutes or less. Having the opportunity to cook 3 of these recipes, it's hard to choose which one I enjoy the most, but I will share with you that their hamburger recipe that I was just talking about elevates the classic hamburger. It has this jam or relish that they combine with red onion and tomato. And it just amps up the flavor that much more. And then you have a simple side salad of arugula with a garlic and balsamic infused vinaigrette, a brioche bun, and cheese that's in the hamburger, which makes that bite oh so good. And I paired it with a glass of red wine from Oregon. And in the middle of the week, it just made Wednesday very, very delicious. HelloFresh makes their delivery service tailored to you and your schedule, as you can select the day of the week you want it to arrive and change as needed. Arriving right to your doorstep in recyclable, insulated packaging. Eat well, live well. The total cost is pretty impressive as well. Compared to paying for a week's worth of groceries, you will be paying less than $10 per serving, and the shipping is free. As a Simple Sophisticate listener, the price is even better. For $30 off your first week of HelloFresh, visit hellofresh.com/sophisticate30 and enter Sophisticate30 as your promo code. Just to give you an idea of what it will cost, for my package of 3 meals for 2 people, the full price is under $60. With the $30 discount off your first week, you pay less than $30 for 3 full meals for 2 people. That's $30 off your first week of HelloFresh. Visit hellofresh.com/sophisticate30 and enter Sophisticate30. Visit the show notes for a direct link and all these details. All right, welcome back. So today's petit plaisir is chicken marsala. Now, this was one of the first recipes I shared on the blog back in, I think it was 2010, 2011. And because of all the different revampings of the blog, this recipe was taken off. It needed to be fixed because of formatting issues, not because the recipe wasn't good, because it's fantastic. But it's coming back. It is back on the blog. I know some of you guys have been looking for it because it is on the sample capsule menu that I produced 2 years ago. But it is back. And again, you can make this in under 20 minutes. So last week, what happened is I had made another recipe with mushrooms and chicken. And I had some leftover mushrooms and I had some leftover chicken for the next night. And I'm thinking, what do I want to make? I don't have a lot of time. I shouldn't say that. I had a lot of time. I didn't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I had a long work day and I was tired, but I was also very hungry. So I looked in my cupboard and I said, oh, I got some mushrooms. Oh, I have some chicken. And guess what I have in my cupboard? I have marsala and I have butter and I have chicken broth. Oh my goodness, my garden has parsley. I think that's pretty much all I needed. And it really is. So the first thing you want to do is take out your chicken. I use chicken tenders. Now you can use chicken breasts if you want. What I like to do and why I always buy chicken tenders is that I have more servings that are already cut up for me, and then they're easier to tenderize. You can absolutely tenderize your chicken breast. Just remember to do it. It makes a big difference, and it literally makes that chicken so tender. So I just cover my chicken tenders with wax paper. And I use my mallet and I on the soft side, the smooth side, and I just shrink them down to about 1/8 of an inch. And then I season them, salt and pepper. I dredge them in flour. And then I heat up a skillet, medium heat, and I add olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, heat that up. Once the pan is ready to go, I put my chicken right in there, brown it on each side. Don't cook it all the way through. You don't really need to do that, but you will do that fairly quickly with the chicken tenders. And about 2.5, maybe 3 minutes on each side. If you have breasts, it'll probably be about 3 to 4 minutes on each side. And then you take them out of the pan. But keep that skillet. Don't remove anything from that skillet. This is when you're going to make that marsala sauce. And it is so good and so simple. First thing you want to do is lower the heat on the skillet to medium to low heat. So just a few notches. Then you're going to put in your sliced mushrooms. All right. Your choice of mushrooms, whichever one you want, just make sure they're sliced. All right. You're going to cook those for about 5 minutes. Then you're going to add the liquid. And it depends on how many people obviously you're cooking for. I was cooking for myself and I had 2 chicken tenders in there. And so I really only needed about 1/3 of a cup marsala and 1/3 of a cup chicken broth. All right. But back up a bit. You put the marsala in first. And for about 30 seconds, just let the alcohol cook out of it. Then you're going to add the chicken stock. And again, let that liquid just simmer. Let all those juices combine with the mushrooms. You can use your wooden spoon and kind of mix it around. You don't have to do it the whole time, but you might want to just toss. Make sure all the mushrooms are able to swim in that liquid. And it's not a ton of liquid, but you want to make sure they're all getting flavored very nicely. Then you're going to stir in about 2 tablespoons of butter. Let it melt. And then once the butter is melted and the pan is still simmering, put your chicken back in. However many chicken tenders you have, put them right back in there. This is when they're going to finish cooking and they're going to absorb that flavor of the marsala sauce. Now, I like to simmer them covered for about 2 to 3 minutes. You do not have to cover it. Some people just do it for about a minute. It's up to you. I would just make the determination based on how long your chicken has left to cook. Like I said, the chicken tenders are going to be done very quickly, but the chicken breast may need a few more minutes. So just really just gauge it on how much more time you need for your chicken breast to be cooked through. Then it's done. See how quickly that was? So easy. I serve mine usually with a side of roasted vegetables, broccoli, or something like that. And that's really all you need. If you wanted to cook some rice, you could and put that sauce on top of the rice and the chicken on top of that. And then just dress with a little bit of chopped parsley and season to taste with salt and pepper. And you're done. It's so simple. So I'll have that recipe on the show notes, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 220 for chicken marsala. Sounds fancy, but it is oh so simple, but very delicious. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each Monday's podcast where I'll recommend a book, a film, or a recipe, anything that has a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. Ooh, before I forget, the Marsala wine. You're like, wait a second, where do I get Marsala wine? Now, I've always just used the one right at my Safeway. Nothing fancy, not even that expensive, because I'm adding butter to it. I'm adding the chicken broth. And so the mushroom, all of that's going to add to that flavor. But if you don't like the taste of that, then you can absolutely choose a fantastic Marsala wine at your wines, wherever they sell wine in your town. And the key is to make sure you're drinking something that is going to taste good. So, I wouldn't drink Marsala straight, but at the same time, what I have used for years was very inexpensive and it still turned out very good. So just something to keep in mind. All right. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today, and I hope you have a wonderful first full week in August. And don't forget, on Sunday, August 12th, we are going to kick off the third annual Simply Luxurious Life French Week. Oh, so excited. And speaking of food, the Simply Luxurious Kitchen will premiere its first season on Saturday, September 8th. I've already started production, like I mentioned last week, and we are rolling. We are making some good stuff, and we're having some fun and eating. Oh my gosh, we're eating so much right now. It's so much fun. Anyway, that's just a few of the business tidbits. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pre-order Living the Simply Luxurious Life, Making Your Everydays Extraordinary and Discovering Your Best Self, which will be released on November 13th, 2018. You can also pick up my first book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide, which is now available in paperback as well as ebook and audio versions on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon, or wherever ebook and audiobooks are sold. To stay caught up on the most recent episodes of the podcast, blog posts, and to receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a morning cup of coffee. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée.